Hello guys, and today I'm going to be talking about the Australian Hannibal Lecter known as Katherine Knight, the first woman to be sentenced to life in prison for the brutal murder and consumption of her partner, John Price. Katherine Mary Knight was born 30 minutes after her twin sister Joy on October 24th, 1955, to parents Barbara Rowan and Ken Knight. Now, I know their names kind of sound fun, like Barbie and Ken, but trust me, no, their relationship was everything but that. The genesis of the Knight family was incredibly messy. Barbara actually met Ken through her then husband Jack Rowan, who was working with him at the time. In hindsight, he probably regretted this decision because soon after, they began their affair. Of course, word of the affair got out and began to spread throughout their small conservative town, forcing the new couple to move out of Aberdeen into Moore, Australia. I'd like to point out that not only did Barbara leave her husband behind, but she also left her 4 kids, all of which refused to move in with her. So to keep the broken family afloat, the 2 youngest boys were sent to Sydney, Australia to live with their aunt, while the 2 older ones remained with Jack. In 1959, 4 years after the birth of Katherine, Jack died, forcing the 2 boys to move into the Knight household. Barbara and Ken would eventually have 4 more boys together, bringing the household number to 8, which 8 children. Jesus Christ. These mofos were getting at it like rap. The Knight household was let's just say a little problematic. Ken was a violent alcoholic and would abuse and sexually assault Barbara up to 10 times a day. Barbara would then go to her 2 young daughters and in graphic detail describe the acts and how much she hated it. At some point, Katherine complained to her mother that one of her partners wanted her to perform a sex act she wasn't comfortable with. Her mother's response? Just put up with it and stop complaining. And it was also stated that during this time, Katherine was sexually assaulted by multiple family members, with her father not being one of them. Now, these claims were later confirmed by multiple psychologists and other family members. By all accounts, Katherine was a fairly pleasant girl, but when she got pissed, this all changed, and she would seemingly go into these murderous trances where nobody could stop her. Upon attending Muswell Brook High School, her anger management issues persisted, quickly making her a loner and a known bully. Apparently, she assaulted one kid with a weapon, and in another account, she was injured by a teacher who was found to be acting in self-defense. Showing some weird type of dichotomy, when she wasn't pissed, she was known to be a model student, oftentimes earning awards and accolades for her good behavior. Which, quick pause right here. How is she going to go up from squaring up with teachers and beating on other kids to 5 seconds later getting awards for her good behavior? Like, the math ain't mathing, come on now. At the age of 15, Katherine left high school remaining largely illiterate. Soon after, she was able to score a job at the local slaughterhouse. 1 year after starting her slaughterhouse job, she left to start what she referred to as her dream job: cutting up offal at the local abattoir with her father. It was here where she was quickly promoted and received her special set of knives. Now, in hindsight, this was absolutely a terrible gift for someone that described dissecting animals as her dream job and also had big anger management problems with numerous assaults to back it up. But, what do I know? Katherine, of course, fell in love with her knife set and would hang them above her bed so they would, according to her, always be handy if I needed them, something of which she'd do into her eventual imprisonment. To be honest, this is some real serial killer type mess right here, but I'm gonna just keep my opinions to myself. While working at the abattoir or slaughterhouse, Katherine tended to creep people out. Workers would oftentimes find her touring various parts of the facility, watching and enjoy as the animals were killed, skinned, and, processed. Most people just saw this as a simple interest in work, with her most likely just looking to improve. In reality, her intentions were much, much, much darker. As we will soon see, Katherine's frequent bouts of rage and fascination with mutilation did not simply go away as she grew older, but instead grew exponentially stronger. At the age of 18, Katherine would meet David Kellett while working at the slaughterhouse. With her being who she was, Katherine, of course, dominated him and the relationship. Apparently, she was a ride or die. Like, if David ever got into a bar fight, whoever he's fighting better be ready to catch a whole another set of hands, because she was literally right by his side squaring up. And honestly, she wasn't even just squaring up, she was just throwing them hands. She said, "Oh, fight?" Was good. In 1974, the pair got married, arriving at their wedding on a motorcycle with David, of course, riding on the back. Funnily enough, Katherine's mother actually gave some good advice to David on this day, saying, "You better watch this one, or she'll freaking kill you. Stir her up the wrong way or do the wrong thing, and you are freaked. Don't ever think of playing a gup on her, or she will freaking kill you." Honestly, 10 out of 10 advice right here. Absolutely love the motherly intuition this woman is dishing out. No comments, no notes, no critiques, just chef's kiss. Katherine's, let's say interesting, relationship with sex reared its head on their wedding night. It was in their hotel room where Katherine attempted to strangle David because he fell asleep after having sex only 3 times. Like, what kind of demon mode was this woman on? Jesus, she really said.
But if he can't fuck 3 times a night, peace.
To be completely honest, David and Katherine's entire relationship was the definition of toxic and abusive. At one point, Knight burnt all of David's clothes and shoes before smacking him in the back of the head with a frying pan. Now, you're probably wondering why, and it was all because he came home late from a darts competition. After being hit, David then ran to his neighbor's house where he collapsed in their front yard. He was later treated for an extremely fractured skull. Somehow, someway, this woman still managed to convince David into dropping the charges. As we will continue to see, Katherine has an amazing knack for manipulating people and regaining their trust. Shortly after the birth of their first child, Melissa, in May of 1976, David left her for another woman and moved to Queensland. He had finally had enough and could no longer tolerate Katherine's extreme violence. The thing is, I don't get why he waited until after they had a kid, but you know, it's whatever, I guess. The very next day, Katherine was seen pushing her newborn down the street in a stroller, literally throwing it side to side in front of like a butt ton of witnesses. She was admitted into St. Elmo's Hospital in Tamworth, where she spent the next several weeks after being diagnosed with postnatal depression. Right after being released, Katherine placed 2-month-old Melissa on train tracks shortly before a train was due. She then picked up an axe, went into town, and threatened to kill several people. A random dude known around town as Old Ted, love that, who was foraging near the railway, found and rescued Melissa, and by witnesses' account, only minutes before the train came by. Again, Katherine was admitted into St. Elmo's Hospital, but was able to sign herself out the very next day. Which, again, I don't get. How are people still allowing her to get out? She's obviously not in her right mind. But who am I? Just some random dude telling stories on YouTube. A few days later after being released, Katherine hopped into a random woman's car, slashed her face, and demanded to be driven to Queensland in order to find David. Fortunate enough, this woman was able to escape after they stopped at a mechanic's shop. It didn't just stop there, because Katherine then grabbed some random kid just doing his little dancey dance, and then began to threaten him with a knife. Now this I kind of find funny, because it took multiple police officers with like broomsticks, literal broomsticks, just like poking at her, to finally get the knife out of her hand. After this entire debacle, she was then admitted into Morisset Psychiatric Hospital. While at the psychiatric hospital, Katherine admitted to multiple physicians that she had planned on killing the mechanic at the shop since he was the one that repaired David's car, allowing him to, in her words, escape. She then planned on driving to David's new home and killing both him and his mother. After being informed of Katherine's rampage and plan, David promptly left his girlfriend and along with his mother moved back to Aberdeen to support Katherine, which, bro, you literally got away. What are you doing? On August 9th, 1976, Katherine was released into the care of David and his mother, where they then moved to Woodbridge, a suburb in Brisbane. Soon after arriving in Woodbridge, Katherine was able to get a job at Dinmore Meatworks in Ipswich. On March 6, 1980, the couple had their second daughter, Natasha. And 4 years later, Katherine left David and briefly moved in with her parents in Aberdeen before eventually renting a home in Muswellbrook. A year after going back to the abattoir, she injured her back, forcing her to go on disability. With there no longer being a need to rent in Muswellbrook, the government gave her home in Aberdeen. In 1986, Katherine met her second terror victim, 38-year-old David Sanders. A few months after meeting, David moved into the Knight household, but meg mind him, props to him, he kept his old apartment in Scones. Katherine being Katherine, over time became very, very jealous of what David might be doing when she wasn't around. It became a vicious cycle where she'd kick him out, he'd go back to his apartment, and then she'd go and beg for him to come back, with him eventually caving. In May of 1987, trigger warning, Knight cut the throat of his 2-month-old dingo pup in front of him. Like, the hell is wrong with this woman? Jesus Christ. According to her, she was simply setting an example of what would happen to him if he ever had an affair. She then promptly knocked him out with a frying pan, apparently a reoccurring weapon of choice for her. In June of 1988, Knight had her third daughter, Sarah, prompting David to put a deposit on the house, which Knight inevitably paid off after getting her disability earnings. Now, when people usually decorate their homes, they try and represent their personalities in some way, whether it be like, just pictures or that kind of thing. And Katherine 100% kept this tradition going. The entire home, from floor to ceiling, was covered in animal skins, skulls, horns, rusty animal traps, leather jackets, old boots, machetes, rakes, and, of course, pitchforks. Nothing was left uncovered. After an argument that resulted in David being hit in the face with an iron and stabbed in the chest with a pair of scissors, he, not surprisingly, moved back into his apartment in Scones. When he later returned home to pick up some of his stuff, he found that Katherine had just cut up all of his clothes. He then took a long vacation from work and went into hiding. Literally said, "You got me fucked up." Several months later, he returned back to the house to visit his daughter, and he had found that Katherine had gone and lied to the cops, saying she was afraid of him. She was given an apprehended violence order, or AVO, against him. In 1990, 35-year-old Knight got knocked up by her former abattoir co-worker John Chillingworth and gave birth to a boy named Eric in 1991. Apparently, this relationship was pretty tame because little is known besides the fact that they were together for 3 years before she left him for a man she had been having an affair with, John Price. John Price, or Pricey, was the father of 3 children when he began his affair with Katherine. By all accounts, he was a terrific bloke that had been liked by everyone. After his marriage ended in 1988, his youngest daughter stayed with his ex-wife, while the 2 older ones lived with him. The absolutely wild thing is, Price had already known about Katherine's violent streak before he let her move into his house in 1995. In the beginning, their relationship was described as a bunch of roses. His children liked her, he was making a lot of money from the local mines, and besides a few violent arguments, life was pretty copacetic. In 1998, an argument ensued after Price refused to marry Knight at her request. So, the vindictive woman she was, began to record and document all the items he had taken from work. Although the items were all outdated and no longer being used by his company, they were literally considered junk. Price was still fired from the job he held for 17 years, which absolutely a dick move by Katherine. Like, how are you just gonna ruin this dude's entire livelihood just because he said no? Like, bro, go somewhere with yourself. That very day, good job Price, he kicked her out, while the news of what she did spread throughout the entire town. She deserved all the shame she got, because why the heck would you do that to someone? Like, oh my god. For some reason, a few months later, Price would reignite the relationship with Katherine, this time barring her from moving in with him. Over time, the fighting became so frequent that even his friends refused to be around him while they remained together. After a series of assaults, Price again ended things with Katherine after she stabbed him in the chest in February 2000. While Price was handling his business, Katherine was scheming. According to all of her children, Katherine's behavior was very strange. First, she stopped at her sister Joy's house where she picked up a camcorder she had left many months prior. She then went straight to her eldest daughter Natasha's house where she began to videotape all of her family. This wasn't a normal type of play. Apparently she kept flashing them, literally like tatas out, letting them like touch her chest, which weird, not normal. I ain't never seen a grandma doing that type of mess. It's trifling. Don't do that. She would also coerce them into saying certain things and was quoted as saying, "I love all my children and I hope to see them again," essentially making a makeshift video will. Then, completely out of character, she took Natasha out to a local Chinese restaurant because she, quote, wanted it to be special. She then asked if Natasha could babysit her two youngest children for a bit. Natasha, sensing something was weird or off, stated, "I hope you're not going to kill Pricey and yourself." She then went back to Price's home where she sent the remaining kids to his ex-wife's home for the night. On February 29, 2000, Price stopped at the Scones Magistrate Court before heading to work to obtain a restraining order against Knight. He wanted her out of his home and out of his life once and for all. That afternoon, Price told his coworkers that if he did not come into work the next day, blame Knight because she would 100% killed him. Later that day, Price arrived back home to an empty household. He spent the rest of the evening with his neighbors before going to bed at 11 p.m. While he was sleeping, Knight casually showed up at his house, watched TV for a few minutes before taking a shower and putting on a set of black lingerie she had bought at a thrift store earlier that day. She then woke Price up, where they had sex, and he fell asleep. Pulling out her butcher knife, she began to stab him multiple times. According to the blood evidence, Price woke up and attempted to turn the lights on. Unable to, he ran out of the room where she chased him throughout the house. He was able to open up the front door and get out, but he stumbled due to all the blood loss. Based on the blood evidence, she then dragged him into the foyer, where she continued to stab him until he passed away in a pool of blood. In the end, John Price had been stabbed at least 37 times. This was an absolute mess of blood. It was literally everywhere. There was a 6-foot wide puddle of blood that remained in the foyer after his murder. After this brutal carnage that she had just unleashed on this poor, unsuspecting man, Knight then took his car and drove to an ATM where she withdrew $1,000. The insanity plea was thrown out of the window for her. Several hours after the murder, Katherine used her prior slaughterhouse experience and began to skin him, removing all of his skin without a single mistake. She then hung what was essentially a flesh pelt on a hook in the front doorway. It would unfortunately be found later by an on-scene officer who mistook it for a curtain. According to the mortician, the expertise in which Katherine was able to skin Price's body was done so well that he was able to, in the end, sew together all of John Price's skin and make it as though it was in perfect condition. After skinning him, she decapitated Price and placed his head along with a few vegetables in a Dutch oven before moving it into a stove to be cooked. Katherine then sliced off parts of his buttocks and cooked them before serving them on a platter filled with baked potato, pumpkin, beetroot, zucchini, cabbage, yellow squash, and her special homemade gravy. She set up plates around the table with cards addressing each of his 2 children. With each card accompanied a small note, which was never released to the public, thankfully. She had planned on feeding Price's remains to his 2 children. In the center of the table sat a handwritten note accompanied with a flesh and blood covered photo of Price. The note, completely spelled wrong, stated, "Time got you back, Johathan, for rapping my daughter. You too Beck for Ross, for Little John. Now play with Little John's dick, John Price." These allegations, of course, were found to be false, and were simply just another attempt by Katherine to smudge John Price's name. A third piece of meat was found in the backyard, with some investigators believing that after trying Price's remains, Katherine grew disgusted and threw it in the backyard. Sometime later, Katherine had arranged Price's flayed and headless body in an armchair, with the left arm placed over an empty soda bottle and the legs crossed. At 6 a.m. the next morning, a neighbor noticed that Price's car was still in the driveway. Not arriving at work, his employer became worried and also sent someone to the house. Both the neighbor and worker knocked on Price's bedroom window to try and wake him up. but after noticing blood on the front door, alerted police who arrived at around 8 a.m. that morning. Officers quickly broke down the back door and began to look around, and they were met with a scene straight out of a horror movie. At the other end of the house sat a comatose Katherine Knight who had attempted to overdose on sleeping pills. She was quickly transferred to a hospital as officers and investigators tried to grapple with what they were looking at. Despite intense questioning, Katherine Knight denied having any memory of what had happened that night. After recovering in the hospital, Knight was charged with John Price's murder on March 6, 2000. When her trial began on October 15, 2001, Justice Barry O'Keefe offered the 60 jury prospects the option of being excused due to the nature of the photographic evidence. 5 accepted. Dr. Timothy Lyons, who performed the autopsy, noted that the meticulous detail and lack of mistakes made during the skinning process meant it took a max of 40 minutes. The entirety of which would have left the perpetrator covered in blood. It was also during this description of the crime scene that Knight went into a rage, forcing others to sedate her. Despite continuing to deny remembering what had happened that night, Katherine pled guilty to the murder. On November 8th, Justice O'Keefe stated she is without a doubt a very dangerous person, and likely, if released into the community, to commit further acts of serious violence, including murder, against those who cross her, particularly males. He goes on to say, a crime of that kind committed by the prisoner calls for the maximum penalty the law empowers a court to impose. Katherine Knight was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, with her papers being marked never to be released. Katherine is still alive today at the age of 66 and is serving out her sentence at Clarence Correctional Center. Apparently, she's just the apple of everyone's eye. She acts like a grandma to everyone that comes into the center, taking care of everyone, and apparently she is also a very good cook, which, why is anyone eating anything that she is cooking? Like, nah, y'all can miss me with that. Well, that is it, y'all. The story of Katherine Knight and the gruesome murder of John Price. I hope that you guys were able to stay to the end, because I know this story was a lot. If you would like to see more content like this, please hit that like button, and if you'd like to see more of my face or my little stick image face, because this is the new format that I'm trying, please hit that subscribe button. Bye.